For me, what it's about is misuse. I like how hacking in the traditional sense is kind of about taking a system that you don't have a lot of agency in and figuring out a way to sort of misuse it in a way where now you have more power to say something that you weren't meant to say. I mean, even in the piece I'm doing here, I'm kind of misusing a piece of software to create this work. Like, I'm using software in a way that wasn't designed to make a print this big. Like, this software was designed to make prints this big. And so that's a small example, but just that idea of sort of misusing something. I think artists are kind of good at that in general, especially when the arts overlap with technology. I think there's a really big opportunity there. My name's Evan Roth. I'm an artist. I'm based in Berlin. I make work that's engaged with the internet. I was doing architecture and started to see there was a big difference between what I was doing in school and what I was doing when I was working. This was like early 2000s, and the web was really becoming adopted by more people. And I was coming home from my day job in the architecture office and dabbling in making websites. There was a lot of gratification I was getting in that, and it had to do with the fact that there was such little monetary incentives for the creative decisions I was making. Like in architecture, anytime I would lay a line down on paper, there would be so much money behind what that line was. And then I loved how on the web, I could almost do anything I wanted to, and none of those decisions I had to figure out how to justify in terms of funding. There were people who were making things, like weird things online, and then posting the source code. To me, having access to how something is produced is like a big role of an empowerment experience. Before, I was making a lot of work that I would characterize kind of as activism, and free software played a big role within that activism as a solution to some problems. A lot of people, not just artists, were like really optimistic about where the web was heading. And even now, as that is sliding further and further away from the place I think we hope it was all going to take us, I still am holding on to a bit of that inspiration that I was getting from that community. From the very beginning of this project, one of the first sketches I had before I ever showed the work was more like this. Like, it was more like a space than as a single scroll coming off the wall, which is how I've been showing it for a few years now. For me, it's super exciting. I think the thing that's going to be different, which we're already feeling kind of being 1/3 of the way installed here, is that you'll really be engulfed by it. You're really stepping into it. It becomes less of an object you're confronting and more of a space that you step into. It's a big step in the work for me. So cache is basically the term for the temporary files on a computer, so that when you're looking at something in a browser, what you're seeing is temporarily downloaded and then it's erased as you keep downloading more and more. It's connected with memory. Like, if we think about how we remember thoughts and how the computer remembers thoughts, there's some overlaps, but there's some differences. And to me, because it's such a temporary directory, it has the affordance of potentially telling interesting things, and it leaves a trail if you decide to archive it, which is what I'm doing for this project. When I'm making pieces from this series, they're usually a singular date. This is the first time when I've sort of changed that process. And so this date is tied to the moment my second daughter was born. And the idea was that it would fill the atrium until it was totally full, which ended up being about 4 months. After I've sort of archived a chunk of the data, I have to take it through a certain process. Use one piece of software to extract all the JPEGs and GIF files and PNG files out of that big block of data. And then once I have that, I'm using another piece of software that's using an algorithm called image packing to dump all of that cache data into this place, and it's trying to just compress it into the smallest and smallest shape it can. And so the software that's made to make these little tiny images, then I'm kind of overusing to produce these huge pieces. But all of that sort of feels good in a certain way because it gets back to this idea of misuse. Like, I like the idea that this software wasn't meant to produce this thing, and if we just sort of tweak it and look at it in a slightly different way, it can offer up a different kind of image that I think is maybe in some ways more interesting than the imagery it was designed to produce. I kind of like that a lot of moments in the piece are having two things next to each other and then questioning why they're together and questioning the importance of them and how much of that is representation of the person that's making it. Because some of those giant images that are on there, that hierarchy doesn't necessarily mean importance. And that sets up part of the piece to me too, is like, is it a true portrait or is it kind of like an anti-portrait? I frame it as a self-portrait, But I frame it that way partially because I like when people start looking at it, then they can come to their own conclusion about whether that's an accurate depiction of what it is. But I think I'm really less interested in this being about me. So I'd be excited for people that could start thinking about how that is a representation in a way of their data also.